Representative Khanna said it plainly. Attorney General Pam Bondi is running out of time. The sentence wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no spectacle, but the impact was immediate. Everyone in the room understood what he was signaling. The fight over the Epstein files had crossed a threshold. What once sounded like bureaucratic delays now felt like deliberate stalling. The patience that protected those excuses was gone. Then came the vote, and it erased any doubt about where Congress stood. This wasn't a narrow margin. It wasn't partisan gridlock. The vote was 427-1. In modern Washington, that kind of consensus is almost unheard of. Congress spoke with a single, overwhelming voice. The message was clear: release the information, or face consequences. Khanna pointed out that this same rare unity had already appeared in other fights. He talked about extending affordable tax credits and how even Republicans signed a discharge petition alongside Democrats, fully aware it could cost them their seats. That kind of political risk doesn't happen casually. It happens when lawmakers sense public pressure reaching a breaking point. According to Khanna, the healthcare crisis and the rising cost of living are already acting as a warning sign for Republicans, who think voters aren't paying attention. He then widened the lens. In districts like his in Silicon Valley, where trillions of dollars of market value are concentrated in a small geographic area, the contrast is impossible to ignore. Donald Trump campaigned by attacking powerful tech elites, railing against billionaires and promising to stand with working-class Americans. He talked about places like western Pennsylvania and industrial towns in Ohio that were hollowed out by lost manufacturing jobs. But now, Khanna argued, Trump spends his time surrounded by tech billionaires, posing for photos, building relationships, and profiting alongside them. Khanna wasn't alone in making that observation. He pointed out that even Steve Bannon, one of Trump's former allies, has said the same thing. Whatever happened to taxing the wealthy? Whatever happened to bringing manufacturing back? Whatever happened to standing up for workers? Instead, the conversation has shifted to accelerating artificial intelligence, even as people warn it could eliminate millions of jobs. And while that's happening, Trump dismisses concerns, mocks critics, and has even referred to Epstein survivors as a hoax. For Khanna, that wasn't just offensive. It revealed priorities. That's why the bipartisan push around the Epstein files matters so much. Khanna and Republican Congressman Thomas Massie have led an effort to force the full release of the Epstein records. Together, they co-sponsored the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which would require all unclassified Epstein-related documents to be posted publicly within 30 days. What happened instead was a partial release filled with heavy redactions. Entire pages were blacked out. Key information was missing. In some cases, you couldn't even read a full paragraph. Now, Khanna says, stronger action is on the table. That includes contempt proceedings and possibly impeachment of Attorney General Pam Bondi. He explained that the House has the power to fine her personally for every day the documents aren't released. But he made it clear this isn't about punishment for its own sake. It's about accountability. He described survivors who came to the Capitol not once, but twice to relive their trauma and tell their stories. For decades, he said, this country abandoned them. Many were young girls from working-class families. Some were daughters of immigrants. Many lacked stable support systems. They were targeted, manipulated, and abused, more than 200 of them. And in the most recent document release, one survivor's name was exposed publicly, while the FBI file she has been requesting for years was still withheld. To Khanna, that alone showed how broken the process has become. The 427-01 vote underscored just how serious lawmakers now view the situation. Even during a lighter moment in the interview, the host joked that the only thing capable of forcing Khanna off the House floor would be talking too long about Alabama football. But the tone quickly returned to the stakes. Words like inherent contempt and impeachment are not used lightly, especially by Democrats, who have often avoided escalating language in the past. So why is this time different? Khanna answered directly. Because this isn't coming from Democrats alone. Republicans are involved. Thomas Massie is leading the charge on the Republican side, and others are quietly backing it. That changes everything. This isn't a partisan attack. It's a bipartisan demand. Khanna emphasized that impeachment isn't the first step. The process would begin with contempt. Bondi would be given a 30-day grace period to comply and release the documents. But he also noted something critical. In his view, she is already violating the law. The clock isn't starting in the future. It's already ticking. The 30-day grace period would not be symbolic. It would trigger real enforcement. If Attorney General Pam Bondi continues to withhold the documents, the sergeant-at-arms could be directed to detain her, and she could face daily fines of up to $5,000 for every day the records remain undisclosed. This isn't theoretical. These are powers Congress actually has. But the lawmaker pushing this made one thing very clear. This is not personal. He said his goal is not to destroy Pam Bondi. In fact, he admitted he barely knew who she was before this fight began. What changed everything was meeting the survivors, listening to their stories, understanding how deeply their lives were damaged. These documents matter because the people who were harmed want them released. Their trauma didn't end years ago. It followed them into adulthood. And if releasing records helps bring even a small measure of truth or closure, then Congress has a moral obligation to act. Then came the question many viewers have been asking for years. If reporting has consistently said Donald Trump is not on Epstein's list, and if there's nothing truly damning about him or even Bill Clinton in these files, why does Trump appear so determined to block their release? That's the mystery. If there's nothing there, why fight transparency so aggressively? Is someone else being protected? That question, the congressman said, cuts straight to the heart of the issue, and it's something that hasn't been seriously examined. One reason Marjorie Taylor Greene joined the effort alongside Thomas Massie and Democrats is because she genuinely believes Trump is not implicated. She reportedly told the president directly, "Just release the files. I don't understand why you won't." She even assured Massie and others that Trump would eventually come around. From the beginning, the bipartisan group made a deliberate choice. They never framed this as an attack on Donald Trump. They framed it around the survivors. Those survivors personally appealed to Trump, telling him he could be a hero. No previous president had ever fully released these files. This was his chance to do something different. And yet, the files remain locked down. So the question keeps growing louder. What exactly is being hidden? Why hasn't the government released the draft 60-count indictment when Epstein was ultimately charged with only 2 counts? Why is the 82-page prosecution memo still sealed? The one that reportedly details Epstein's connections to wealthy and powerful individuals? Why is there such urgency to protect what some lawmakers now call the Epstein class? And why are FBI witness interviews still being withheld? Every time officials choose secrecy over disclosure, public doubt deepens. Each delay makes the explanations less believable. Instead of calming concerns, the concealment fuels them. One observer listening to the conversation noticed a clear pattern. The criticism of Silicon Valley elites, the criticism of political power brokers, and the Epstein files all point to the same underlying issue. There has never felt like such a wide gap between what elite networks want the public to believe and what everyday Americans are actually experiencing. And that raises a bigger question. Is the Epstein case the issue that finally scrambles traditional political lines? In many ways, it already has. The unlikely alliance between progressives, libertarian Republicans like Thomas Massie, and even figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene is something Washington rarely sees. No one expected this issue to become the bridge. These lawmakers are usually on the losing side of votes. War powers resolutions, transparency efforts, accountability bills, they often go nowhere. But this time is different. Polling shows that even within the MAGA base, this is one of the rare issues where voters break from the president. And the reason is simple. People despise elite impunity. In small towns across America, people may make mistakes. They may have affairs. They may live imperfect lives. But they don't fly to private islands where young girls are abused and then stay silent about it. There is a deep sense that a small group of powerful people live by an entirely different set of rules, And Americans hate that. That resentment extends beyond politics. It's one of the reasons people distrust certain tech billionaires. When wealthy executives casually talk about eliminating millions of jobs through automation and artificial intelligence, it feels disconnected and cruel. Truck driving alone is the largest single occupation for men without college degrees in this country. Even if technology brings benefits, indifference to the human cost sends a clear message about whose lives matter. That's why the Epstein files are about more than one criminal case. They represent a larger reckoning, a test of whether the system protects the powerful or serves the public. And until every relevant document is released, that question will continue to haunt American politics, and this idea that there is a class of people who have rigged the system and operate under a completely different standard of justice is one of the few forces left that can genuinely unite the left and the right. It cuts across ideology because it speaks to something deeply felt, fairness, or rather, the absence of it. That's why it matters to underline what Khanna pointed out next. Democrats in multiple states are trying to pass laws to protect workers from AI displacement, to shield kids from predatory algorithms, to give truck drivers, warehouse workers, and gig workers a fighting chance. And it's not happening because Republicans at the federal level are blocking it through total federal preemption. That means no state is allowed to act. No state can protect workers. No state can protect children. No state can slow the damage, and this isn't coming from someone hostile to technology. This is the representative of Silicon Valley saying it plainly. AI could cure rare diseases. It could reduce housing costs. It could transform productivity. But here's the reason Americans are more skeptical of AI than people in almost any other advanced nation. They don't trust the elite class that controls it. They've seen this movie before. Globalization promised prosperity and delivered hollowed-out towns. The wealth piled up at the top while everyone else was told to adapt. Americans believe the same thing will happen again. That AI will enrich tech billionaires and their families while working people absorb the losses. And that belief isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. That same mistrust sits at the heart of the Epstein files. Controversy. Khanna's warning wasn't a political attack. It was a diagnosis. He was describing what happens when a government promises sunlight and delivers shadows. Survivors traveled to Washington not once but twice, forcing themselves to relive trauma most people can't imagine because they were told transparency was coming. Instead, they were handed documents so heavily redacted that entire pages were unreadable. Black bars where answers should have been. One survivor's name was exposed publicly, while the very FBI file she had been requesting for years was withheld. That single moment became a symbol of the entire failure. The people with the least power bore the greatest cost, while those with influence remained insulated. Behind sealed records and missing pages, that contradiction is what ignited the outrage. When transparency only appears after threats of fines, contempt, or arrest, people understand what's really happening. That's not disclosure. That's damage control, and the delays only make the question louder: who is being protected? Khanna didn't pose it as speculation. He stated it as an observable pattern. Every redaction, every partial release, every unexplained omission reinforces the sense that a shield exists not for victims, not for the public, but for the powerful. That's why the 427-1 vote mattered. In an era this polarized, that kind of consensus doesn't signal agreement. It signals alarm. It signals that members of Congress across ideologies recognize that institutional trust is breaking and that the Epstein case sits squarely at the center of that fracture. The survivors weren't wealthy. They didn't come from connected families. Many were daughters of immigrants. Some grew up without fathers. They had no lobbyists, no media teams, no legal armies. They had trauma, and for decades, the institutions designed to protect them either ignored them or looked the other way. So, when the government finally promised transparency and then delivered confusion, contradictions, and silence, the betrayal cut deeper, and this was never about salacious headlines. Survivors weren't asking for spectacle. They were asking for their own records. FBI interview notes, prosecution memos, draft indictments that hinted at a far broader case than the one the public was ever shown. The full scope of what was investigated and what was quietly set aside, because until those records are released, the story doesn't end. It lingers, and every time officials hesitate, redact, or deflect, the public learns exactly where to keep looking. These survivors were never looking for spectacle or headlines. They were searching for clarity about their own lives, their own histories, and what was done to them. So, when the Attorney General's office finally released documents that were almost entirely blacked out, revealing very little beyond confusion and frustration, those same survivors felt abandoned all over again. It wasn't just disappointing. It was re-traumatizing. The system they were told would finally be transparent once again closed its doors, and Khanna was not standing alone when he demanded answers. What made this moment so unusual and so powerful was who joined him. Thomas Massie, a lawmaker known for his fiercely independent streak and deep skepticism of government secrecy, stood beside him. Then others followed. Lawmakers who almost never agree on taxes, regulation, immigration, or foreign policy suddenly found common ground. They were united around one simple question. If nearly everyone in Congress wants these files released, why is the government still holding them back? For the public, it was a strange and almost unfamiliar sight. The usual political battle lines began to blur. This wasn't a liberal cause or a conservative crusade. It wasn't about party loyalty or culture wars. It was something more basic and more emotional. A shared sense that elite impunity, whether proven or suspected, had crossed a line that angered people from every background. Even within circles where loyalty to leadership normally outweighs transparency, pressure started to build. Reports surfaced of insiders urging the administration to release everything, arguing that full disclosure would calm public suspicion instead of fueling it. The logic was simple. If there's nothing to hide, openness is the fastest way to restore trust. And yet, the resistance didn't disappear. It didn't come in the form of loud denials or public confrontations. It came quietly, through delays, through partial releases, through explanations that sounded technical but never answered the core question. Khanna wasn't subtle when he outlined what could come next. He reminded everyone that the House has real enforcement power. Congress can hold officials in contempt. It can impose personal fines of up to $5,000 per day for non-compliance. And it can even invoke inherent contempt, a rarely used but fully constitutional process that allows the sergeant at arms to detain an official who refuses to follow the law. Most Americans have never heard of inherent contempt because it almost never happens. The fact that lawmakers are openly discussing it tells you how serious the frustration has become. Khanna made a point of saying this was not personal. He said he didn't know Pam Bondi before this controversy and had no interest in destroying her career. His goal was direct and uncomplicated: release the documents. Survivors deserve access to their own records. The law requires transparency, and public trust depends on it. But he was equally clear about one thing. Congress's patience is not unlimited. If the documents remain hidden, the consequences will escalate. That leads to the question that refuses to go away. Why are so many critical documents still missing? The gaps are hard to ignore. The 82-page prosecution memo that reportedly laid out the full scope of the case remains unreleased. FBI interviews with individuals said to have first-hand knowledge are still withheld. A draft indictment outlining nearly 60 potential charges, when only 2 were ever filed, has never been made public. These aren't minor omissions. They are central pieces of the story. When those questions go unanswered, a vacuum forms. And the public fills that vacuum with speculation. Not because people are eager for conspiracy theories, but because history has taught them what often happens when powerful figures are involved. If the missing pages contain nothing meaningful, releasing them would be easy. The ongoing resistance only deepens suspicion at every step. What made this moment even more volatile was the public response. This wasn't a niche issue confined to political activists or online commentators. Polling and public feedback showed widespread frustration across nearly every demographic. Urban and rural voters, progressives and libertarians, independents, moderates, and even voters who rarely agree on anything else. The conclusion was remarkably consistent. The files should be released, and the government's hesitation doesn't add up. And then came the deeper observation Khanna articulated so clearly. This case struck a nerve because it symbolizes something Americans have felt building for years. The belief that there are two systems of justice in this country, one for ordinary people, and another for an elite class that seems protected from consequences. It doesn't matter whether you work in a factory, a restaurant, or run a small business. It doesn't matter whether you live in a coastal city or a rural town. People feel that gap. And once people feel it, they don't forget it. People feel the imbalance. They see the divide. Khanna described it through the lens of his own district in Silicon Valley, where the wealth of a few individuals rivals national budgets. He highlighted tech figures casually discussing the elimination of entire job categories through automation, indifferent to the workers whose livelihoods hang in the balance. That pattern mirrors the frustration surrounding the Epstein case, a tightly interwoven network of powerful people, shaping society while remaining shielded from accountability. This recognition turned the investigation into a broader referendum on institutional trust. It's no longer just about events on a private island decades ago. It's about whether the government still applies justice evenly, whether transparency depends on public pressure or personal influence, and whether institutions respond to law or connections. Khanna's comments about elite impunity resonated because they echoed a long-held public perception. The system feels rigged, and the people who rig it rarely face consequences. He wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was speaking from experience, observing cases vanish, names disappear from filings, and investigations narrow when political stakes rise. What's happening now is bigger than documents. It's a moment where the country is watching to see whether the system can still self-correct, whether a strong congressional mandate outweighs bureaucratic hesitation, and whether survivors matter more than reputations. The promise of transparency is being tested against the convenience of protecting powerful individuals. That's why this controversy refuses to fade. Politicians aren't driving the story anymore, survivors and voters are. People who rarely align politically are demanding answers together, and the administration's reluctance to release the full files has only strengthened that coalition. This is no longer about a single attorney general or a set of documents. It's about whether the public can trust the government to tell the truth when it matters. Khanna wasn't exaggerating when he said this could reshape politics. It has already done something almost unthinkable, brought libertarians, progressives, populists, and establishment skeptics into the same fight. Not because of ideology, but because of a shared instinct that something is fundamentally wrong when accountability stalls at the doorstep of power. The next steps will determine how history remembers this moment. Complete disclosure could mark a turning point, showing that public pressure and bipartisan unity can force transparency. Continued secrecy, however, will harden the perception of a protected class, deepen public distrust, and cement the belief that justice is applied selectively. Khanna's closing point was simple, yet haunting. This story isn't going away. Not because critics won't let it go, not because Congress wants headlines, but because survivors deserve closure. They deserve to understand why the system failed them. They deserve to know who made decisions that shaped their lives without their consent. Until those answers are given in full, this issue will remain a wound that refuses to heal. This moment isn't just political. It's a test of credibility, accountability, and the very idea of equal justice. The outcome will reveal whether the government serves truth or protects the powerful at all costs. If you want to stay informed as this unfolds, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The story isn't over, and the next chapters could be decisive.